Hi, this is Ava from Soul GPS. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be tackling a very important question by popular demand. I've been getting quite a few email inquiries from my viewers, from you, about how having been abused in the past and having been through CPTSD or still going through CPTSD, how that can sabotage a new relationship. So before I get into the topic, I wanted to also quickly mention that I thank you so much for your support of my channel and for frequently checking in, for writing me emails, from asking questions. I want to just let you guys all know that as much as I would love to answer every single email, I'm just unable to do it at this time. If you would like to engage with me personally, the links to my website are below, and I offer both email support as well as one-on-one coaching. So that is really the only way in which I can engage with people at this time, because, like I said, I'm just unable to process the volume of emails I receive. But I try to at least read them and get the questions in the queue so that I can make videos for you and come here and connect with you on YouTube. So thank you for questions. All right, getting to the topic. So what tends to happen when we are entering abusive relationships is that the wounds from our past, typically from our childhood, get inflamed. And there really isn't anyone alive, I don't think, in my opinion, that is wound-free. There are people who have transcended their pain and who have freed themselves from the past, and that's sort of what we're all here to do, right? But we all have to deal with it to one extent or the other. Now, when you meet a person who's highly abusive, manipulative, a narcissist, and a malignant person, they destroy the inner architecture of your mind, of your psyche. They make you completely doubt your past, your self-trust. They can destroy your self-esteem, cause a lot of damage, a lot of pain. Therefore, it is often advised that after you've been through a relationship like that, you take some time to heal. And usually what happens, actually it happens with every single client I've ever worked with, that we start with the acute situation at hand, but we always tie it back to earlier events. We always tie it back to either some form of training that the person was subjected to, say, for instance, putting up with abuse, tolerating high amounts of pain, therefore missing the red flags, missing the signs of somebody taking advantage of them, or tremendous desire and need for validation, fear of loneliness, and so on and so forth. So it's a bundle of vulnerabilities that this person then needs to deal with. So it's very much advised, for the right reason, to not get involved too quickly in another relationship. Why? Because everything is inflamed, right? Our wounds are bleeding. We can be defenseless because we haven't yet sort of gathered ourselves and been able to recreate a state of homeostasis within ourselves. So it will be very easy to either A, get into another abusive relationship because, again, we're very vulnerable. We really want to connect because we're feeling lonely. We're in pain. We want to get away from that pain, right? So it can be very easy for another abuser to slip under the radar and then do even more damage. So that's not a good idea. Or B, we may meet an amazing person, but because we're very reactive, almost radioactive, it can be very easy for us to damage that relationship because we're dealing with a lot of issues. We're still in the middle of processing all of this. And it can take somewhere between, I would say, a year, just realistically, to even 2 years to get through this. I mean, you don't have to wait 2 years to begin dating. You don't even have to wait a year to begin new relationships, but take it really, really, really slow and form friendships as opposed to jumping in straight into the romance and just going full speed ahead, right? Because it's so easy to make mistakes when you're going fast. So what I want you to know here is that if you are in a relationship, if you started a new relationship, but you're finding yourself questioning whether the person you're with is an abuser or whether you are being triggered, you're going to need to do some internal work and some discernment. So first off, I want to say that it is absolutely okay to be emotional and even reactive in relationships, even if you've already processed a lot of stuff, even if it's been years, even if you haven't been through a massively abusive relationship. It is perfectly normal to be triggered, to be provoked, to be misunderstood, and again, to be emotional, especially for us women, right? We go through our monthly cycle, and sometimes, during that particular time of the month, things can get really sensitive. We may read into things. We may need much more validation, much more love, and to feel secure, to feel like everything is okay, to feel soothed, right? So all of that is normal. That's just part of life. However, if you are feeling emotional, you have to be very careful not to dump this on another person, on your partner, on the sort of innocent bystander, right? So that's really important to remember. Now, the other thing to remember is that during this time, this sensitive time when you're being very reactive and very sensitive and easily triggered, your intuition will be muddled during this time because the seat of your emotion, which is typically in the gut, is the same place where the pain is, right? So sometimes you may need to take your time when making decisions, also engage that prefrontal cortex, right? Which also can be difficult because if our emotions are running the show, then the limbic system, the middle brain, is overactive. And so it can be much more difficult to access your logic. So just know this and be patient with the process. And if you don't know what kind of decision to make, just hold off, journal it, write it down. Also be careful who you ask for advice because, of course, and most of your friends and family are going to be very well-meaning, but they're not you. And they may advise you to make the wrong decision because they think that that's the right decision, and then you'll be left with the consequences. To just be aware of that. Also be aware of the fact that you may be swinging back and forth between feeling angry and also feeling then sorry for being angry. And the anger usually comes as a result for being triggered about something. And suddenly, a flood of emotions can come on. So just be aware when that happens. And the key, where we all want to get to eventually, is to find that peaceful space in the middle that is not super emotionally inflated and just super, let's say, like euphoric almost, because those moments can also happen when you're just feeling, your life is back in on a good track, and sometimes when we're super happy, joyful, and euphoric, it can also lead to us making the wrong decisions, right? Because we just feel like everything's, no matter what, it's all going to be okay. And so, that's how our wallets get stolen. That's how, we get in a car with the wrong person, and things like that can happen. So just be aware of it. And versus the other side, which is the sort of more depressed downside where, the wounded child is running the gamut. So we want to get somewhere in the middle where there is peace, when there's tranquility, serenity, and that takes work, that takes time, and that takes focus, most importantly. So if you are in a situation when you find yourself in a negative reaction, you just feel sort of the wave coming, and it can be immobilizing and can feel kind of chemical. First thing you need to do is assess whether you're being abused or if you're just being triggered. It's a massive difference, but there are some subtleties, right? If you're abused, you're typically being yelled at, you're being blamed, demeaned, gaslighted, criticized, in a way that's pronounced, or something that's been going on systematically for extended period of time. It's a recurring thing. It happens almost daily. It's this up and down cycle of abuse, right? And then somebody is very sweet to you, and then they're mean to you, and they're sweet, and then they're mean, and goes back and forth like that. That's abuse. If you're triggered, it's more like You may be in a flashback. You may have just remembered, maybe a song just came on, or you saw something that reminded you of a stressful situation, or you are under stress. That can be enough to throw off the HPA axis. Or, the other thing that can happen, you may be receiving constructive criticism from your new partner, and you may be mistaking that for something that's cruel and mean, and it isn't meant to be. It's just feedback. But because you're so sensitive and everything is so inflamed, you may be reading into it. So make an assessment. Is it more trigger, or are you being abused? And if you're being abused, again, look for that up and down systematic cycle, right? If it's just a trigger, and say you are in the company of your new partner, here's something you can do. Here's a 5-step process of something you can do. Number 1, you want to draw a boundary around yourself, which is a boundary of self-responsibility. What does this mean? This means that, and that's step 2, you acknowledge verbally that you're in the middle of a reaction, or a flashback, or something's triggered you, and this has nothing to do with the person. They may have said something, but this is your issue, and you're going to be working through this. So this is a very respectful way of drawing a boundary so you don't damage the relationship. Number 3 is you put yourself first. It's an act of self-care by stating your need, and it could be a need for, I need a hug, or it could be a need like, I need some space right now. I need to work through this. So you state your need. This is your self-care. It's, again, very self-responsible thing to do. Now you're going to get into your space and you begin your self-soothing process. It's an internal process. And it's 3 steps. First thing you're going to do is you're going to validate yourself. So you're going to tell yourself, I'm having a reaction. It's completely normal. It is going to pass. Everything is okay. I've got this, right? So it's like the adult is stepping in and is helping the child, because it's the child, the wounded child, that's having the reaction. Number 2 is you're going to talk to your inner child like the loving parent would. So, I've got you. I love you. You're safe. I love you. You're safe. I love you. It's one of my favorite things to say for myself when I'm going through a reaction. It's, I love you. You're safe. And just repeat that until the pain begins to go away. And you want to have a positive dialogue. It can be an affirmation. So now you're going to start to feed yourself positive things like, you're healthy, you're brilliant, you've come so far, you're going to be okay, I know you've got this, and so on and so forth. So you see, you're having this positive dialoguing that builds on itself. Also realize that on the physical side, there is an actual muscle cramp that can take place. So you can start breathing into it, watching it, not judging it, just holding it, and then let the cramp relax, right? So you're going to do that until you feel a sense of relief, and then you can come back to your partner, and if this feels good, you can share. And say, listen, I've just gone through this. This reminded me of X, Y, and Z. Again, this had nothing to do with you. I'm working through this. Know that I'm going to be okay, and thank you for being here. Yeah, and you just go through this process. So real quick about inner child issues and, like this whole thing, like what is this inner child thing, right? It's a result of parental damage. It's an old wound that pretty much most of us have, because there's no perfect ideal parents in this world. Some are better, some are worse. But sometimes there are people who come out damaged from relatively good parenting, from good homes. And then there can be also amazing champions that come out of very pathological homes. So it's difficult to always, point the blame, like this was definitely that. But, if you've been doing some of this work on yourself, you'll be able to probably pinpoint events and times in your life when you have felt this pain early on. And that's usually the event that needs to be revisited and worked through with a therapist or with a coach or through guided imagery and so on. So it can be the wound is typically the result of either too much criticism, too much demeaning comments and so on, or it can be neglect. So the parent behaves as if you don't matter. And so that's the kind of wound that begins to form, is I don't matter, I'm not good enough, and so on. So the child, here's something we need to realize, is an entity within us. We have several entities. Like one way to that Freud, for instance, divided it was the id, the ego, and the superego. Superego being the morality compass, the parental father figure, the society that sort of, moralizes. And what often happens for people who've been through abuse is that gets inflamed and inflated. So we have this critic that constantly demeans us and talks us down. Very damaging. So that needs to be healed. Or another way that I like to divide this into also kind of a trinity is we have the ego, which is the sort of operating system, the operating self, the identity that we most often default into in our personalities. Then we have the inner child, which is, I'm going to talk about it a little bit more in a moment, but in this case, it's the wounded child who seeks attention and who can sometimes sabotage our current state. And then there's the higher self that knows the truth, that is compassion, it's the compassion parent, the wise person, the wise part of ourselves who can come in and soothe. So the child, which is part of our identity, is addicted to pain. We have to remember this. Its identity is vested in this cramp, in this sort of basket full of flashbacks and wounds. And it is, another way to look at it, it's an overused neural pathway it's kind of like we've been carving this groove for many, many, many years. So it feels familiar. It's kind of like, we're walking on this surface through our life, and then there's this deep groove that sort of runs alongside. And when there's too much stress, we kind of topple over and we fall into that groove. And it can be difficult to come out of it, right? Because it just feels so familiar. And the interesting thing, I'm just going to mention this brief because it's a huge subject in of itself, is that when you meet a narcissist or an abuser, they typically have a very similar groove within. And so we link up on that level. It's like two wounded children understanding each other. And that's why it can feel so real, so intense. There can be an element of fantasy. It's the realm of the child, right? The magical thinking. And it can be, but it keeps you stuck in that victim state, right? And that person can then, who too is in the victim state, the abuser too feels like they're the victim. That's why they're entitled to take from you and abuse you. So it's a neural pathway that just gets used and used and used for years and years and years, and so it's easy to fall into it. And here's an interesting thing. If you do work on this, and if you soothe the pain, if the pain goes away, which it will gradually start to go away, there will be no more need for the child's validation. So understand that for the inner child, it's a form of threat. It doesn't want to let go because then there'll be no more need for it. But that's a bit of an illusory thinking, and I'll explain in a moment. But it's a very real fear that we have, and most of us are not even aware of, which can be one of the reasons why the pain wants to stick for so long and not let go, because it's actually really, it's not that difficult to come out of the groove. It just requires some practice, some attention, some work, and of course knowing about this, right? So if you don't know what to do then. But if you do, you can come out of it, but there can be resistance. You come against this resistance. So that's because the inner child's holding on, because its identity is vested in it. It wants to be there, wants to cry. It wants to need that attention. It wants to need the help from another person. It thinks that it's entitled to it. It thinks that it needs to reach out for the parent. Like it's still crying, even though we might be 30, 40, 50 years old, it's still going to cry, it's still going to want it. But the truth is that you and only you can soothe that pain. No one else will do it for you. In fact, if you put your trust or you put that job in somebody else's hands, not only we have no right to do that, but also you can end up really sabotaging yourself, which is what happens when we enter into abusive relationships, because the narcissist convinces us that they can fix our pain, they can make us feel better, and they do for a moment, even though we kind of sense something's wrong, right? Because it's a manipulation. So we do feel better for the moment, but then we fall back and it gets even worse. The groove gets even deeper, right? So that's something to know. So it will take a few rounds. It will take some time to get this. And here are 3 practices that I want to put out there for yourself to work on your inner child pain. If you are in an acute situation, you want to do the self-soothing. It's the exercise I mentioned earlier. If you want to be proactive, You want to write a letter to your child and do things like guided imagery. So in the letter, you're going to write about, you're going to revisit the times when you were hurt, and you're going to write about, how you now as an adult will never ever let this happen again, how you are there for yourself, how you are reparenting yourself, how you can always count on yourself. So you're going to start building trust and validate the pain of the child. It's proactive work. And if you do it regularly, say once or twice a week, you spend 30 minutes or so working on this, it's going to have a massive result. So the reactions, if you're going to have them in the future, will be much, much less intense. And then there's the sustaining work you can be doing, which is to create a championing voice inside yourself through affirmations, through morning greeting. When you look in the mirror and you greet yourself with a smile and you say, "This is so nice to see you. I love you. Have a wonderful day." And you kind of cultivate, I'm just as I said that, I've started to feel this. It's like, it's got this positivity, this kind of sunshine energy to it. And if you do it regularly, it's going to help sustain you in a really good state. If you're doing the proactive work, it will up-level you on a deep level. And then if you do fall into that groove, you can do the acute work of self-soothing. So one more thing I want to mention before I wrap up here is that the inner child, so I mentioned the wounded child, right? So it's kind of the dark side of the inner child. Then there's a bright side of the inner child, and I call it the wonder child. Actually, these are not my words. These are the words of John Bradshaw, fantastic psychologist and author of many books, no longer with us, unfortunately, but a tremendous resource. I often recommend to my clients the work of John Bradshaw on the inner child, on family dynamics, and so on. So the wonder child has an emotion, and the wounded child has an emotion that's predominant. So for the wounded child, the emotion is pain, right? And pain is sort of this confluence of different emotions that are dark and heavy, like grief, sadness, anger, right? So on. So it's like a mishmash, and it manifests as pain, actual physical pain in the body. But because pain is pronounced, it feels real. So it can be very easy to confuse these emotions with reality, which they're not. That's why so often, if you really stop and pay attention while you're in the grips of flashback, or if you're in grips of an emotional reaction, everything around you may be just fine, right? Sun is shining, birds are chirping, right? It's calm, it's okay. But inside, you're going through a tumult. That is because the pain can be very overwhelming, and it's super pronounced, so it feels more real than reality, if that makes sense. The wonder child, the predominant sensation, emotion of the wonder child is awe. So it's the feeling you get when, say, you walk outside and you look at a starry sky, right? And you walk in the woods, or you see something amazing, or you hear a song that really touches you deeply. That's awe. That's the wonder child. Now, this feeling is subtle. It requires the absence of all the heaviness, right? And it feels more fleeting. It's much harder to hold on to it. In fact, I don't think we can hold on to it. It either is or it isn't. And the great thing about this work is that once you soothe the wounded child and the pain begins to depart, the awe will naturally, and the peace will naturally arise, because that's the reality underneath the tumult, right? So that's why working on your inner child is so, so important. And if you heal this, the other benefit is that you will no longer feel lonely, because inside you have all of these voices, you have all of these entities, you have all of this curiosity and zest for life. All of that is still in there. It's the same thing that was in you when you were young, right? So it's still there. It's just been occluded by layers and layers of pain, fear, and so on. And so being in your company, you'll be filled with wonder. You'll be filled with joy and curiosity. It's gonna be fun. It's not gonna be that hard, right? And then it will be much easier to create relationships from that place, because you're not going to be radioactive or, afraid that people will use you and abuse you. You will have had that experience and the boundaries set, so you don't put yourself in situations where you're abused. You'll say no to that. But then when you're around nice people, it will be much easier for you to connect. And that's what we all yearn for, isn't it? Is to have that beautiful, deep connection with other people. And then the other thing that I think is, I just want to put it out here, there's going to be more material on this in the future, but if you do seek out company, if you do need connection, the wounded us have a tendency to kind of retreat into a cave and wait, right? We're waiting for others to reach out to us. Why? Why don't we take the step? Why don't we pick up the phone? Why don't we go out and connect with people? It's scary, I know, because we're all afraid of rejection, but it is the same thing that all of us have to struggle with and deal with. And, you know, the people we're waiting for to come and reach out and connect with us may be feeling exactly the same way and likely are as we are. So this work allows you to take destiny in your hands, literally, and live the life that you want now rather than waiting for it to happen later. So I hope that this video was helpful. Again, this is mostly relevant to people who have already done some inner work after having been through this, through this abusive relationship and are looking to start a new relationship. So again, I hope this was helpful. Share below, send the video to anybody who you think may benefit. And again, if you're looking to engage with me, you're always welcome to send me an email and connect that way, or on Facebook, but just know that if I don't answer you, don't take it personally. Again, I have no capacity at this point to do it. But if you are interested in engaging with me deeper, I invite you to do so through my website. Links are down below. Thank you for your attention, and all the best to you.